Hello, and welcome back to Ask a Newsworker. Today we're going to be talking about trust. We're going to be talking about trust in the media. I came across this article. It was recently published from Gallup. It's based on a poll done by the Gallup polling company. The headline is Americans' trust in media remains near record low. Story highlights are 34% have a, quote, great deal or, quote, fair amount of confidence in media. 38% with no trust at all outpaces great deal or fair amount for the first time. I'll read the start of the article here. At 34%, Americans' trust in the mass media to report the news, quote, fully, accurately, and fairly is essentially unchanged from last year and just 2 points higher than the lowest Gallup has ever recorded in 2016 during the presidential campaign of that year. Just 7% of Americans have a, quote, great deal of trust and confidence in the media, and 27% have a, quote, fair amount. Meanwhile, 28% of U.S. adults say they do not have very much confidence, and 38% have none at all in newspapers, TV, and radio. Notably, this is the first time that the percentage of Americans with no trust at all in the media is higher than the percentage with a great deal or a fair amount combined. Now, that's just America, but I suspect you would get similar numbers in places like Canada and the UK, maybe even in Europe. I don't know about Asia. I don't know about Africa, but I would say at least within the English-speaking world, the Anglosphere as it's also called, I suspect you'd get very similar results. And even if you didn't get the exact same results, the exact same answers, you would probably hear from a fair amount of people, I certainly have as a news worker, who would say, I don't trust the news. I don't trust the media. I don't trust what I see, hear, and read through media outlets, through media sources. That's something I've encountered, when I just meet people casually at parties or through friends, family, whomever. When they find out I work in the news, they'll often be very candid. Not everybody, but a lot of people have told me I don't really trust the news. I don't really read the news because I don't trust it. That's sort of, I guess, the final endpoint of a person who has lost trust in the news. They just stop looking at it, reading it, consuming it altogether. And why is this? Why do people not have trust in the news, in the media? Why is there such a lack of trust? I will attempt to begin to answer it like I've attempted to begin to answer a lot of questions on this site. I'm not really here to provide definitive answers. I'm trying to get the conversation going, and I'm trying to get you, the viewer, thinking about why this may be, and also to give my perspective as a news worker, as a person who's worked in the news business for some time. We in the news business have a very important role in informing the public about what's going on in many parts of the world, involving institutions like governments, businesses, all sorts of other organizations and things going on in the world. We're the media. We're between other things. That's what media means. It's medium. We're the medium between, say, the government and the people, say business and the people, communities and the people. We're this sort of connective tissue between what's happening in the wider world and the person who's just going about their daily life, doing what they're trying to do, working a job, raising a family. We're in the service of providing those people with information as best we can. But because we're in that position, we're in that role of being in the middle, there is a great opportunity to get it wrong, either intentionally or unintentionally, and yes, to misinform. Because there are situations where a news outlet will come into information that they perhaps will mishandle and pass along incorrectly. Or, unfortunately, there are people within the news business who behave nefariously and have certain agendas where they want to pass along wrong information, or they want to pass along at least incomplete information. I would say one of the biggest sources of distrust in the media, based on my own experiences and my own observation, is that the media in many cases, and this isn't always intentional, and I would argue that in many cases it's not intentional, at least in terms of the most reputable and professional of the news organizations out there. A lot of the time the mistrust comes from the fact that a lot of reporting is incomplete. And it's not necessarily incomplete because the news outlet or the reporter in question doesn't want to tell the whole story. Sometimes they don't have the room, the space, the time, the budget to tell the whole story. And sometimes they don't know the whole story themselves. Because remember, a reporter and a news outlet, they're passing things on from other people. And if they haven't been given the full story, if they don't have all the information, then you, the viewer, the news consumer, won't have all the information either. So what happens in a lot of cases is that a news outlet will pass along information that's incomplete, and a person on the other end, a news consumer, will say, hey, this is incomplete. You guys are missing this, you're missing that. There's certain details you didn't include. This must be a conspiracy to misinform or mislead the public, when in truth, maybe they didn't have all the information themselves, because once again, the news business is made up of human beings who are fallible and imperfect and don't have all the answers themselves. I would say a lot of news outlets actually make a mistake in presenting themselves as having all the answers. There's a lot of branding in the media business that says, news you can trust. We've got the answers you seek. We know what you're trying to find out, and we're going to tell you everything. When the truth is they're not, because in many cases they don't know everything. A lot of us don't know a lot of things. A lot of us are sort of awakening from ignorance every single day. I learn something new all the time. I'll report on a story 1 week as part of my job, and then 2 weeks later I'll know way more about it, and I'll think, that original report left a lot of things out. I mean, just to take one incendiary example, the Israel-Palestine conflict. I mean, if a person just comes to that story fresh, like doesn't know a single thing about everything that's happened, say, since the founding of the state of Israel, it was like, oh, there was an attack in Jerusalem today, one side hurt the other side. What's going on here? Well, there's a huge backstory there that's not going to be present necessarily in that report. And that goes for many reports. I mean, American politics as one example, British politics, Canadian politics. These are long stories that have gone back a long time. They started a long time ago, and a lot of media outlets are only going to deal with the day-to-day. They're not going to give necessarily the historical context or deeper meaning that would maybe make these stories make more sense or have more impact. So a lot of it is that the news is providing an incomplete picture in many cases of what's really happening and what's really going on. And a lot of people will catch on to this because a lot of people in the public are smart and educated and resourceful and curious, and they'll do their own digging, they'll do their own research and say, hey, you guys missed this, you guys didn't include this. But that will turn into sort of an accusation that the truth is being hidden, when in many cases the truth was not necessarily known by the people in question in the media outlet to begin with. They didn't have all the answers. And again, a lot of these stories are just huge. Like the political, historical stories of any import are just massive, and it can be very hard to include all the information. And again, I would also argue that the news is not the same as, say, like an education in history. If you read the news every day, you're informed as to what is happening right now, but you don't necessarily know what happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago. You have to go read a history book for that. And that's why I always tell people, and a message that I'll continue to put on this channel, is that you should be reading more than just the daily news if you want a good understanding of what's really happening. I mentioned Israel-Palestine as one example. There's a lot to read there. There's a lot to look up there. American politics, a lot to read there. Pick any issue you want. There's a lot to read beyond the daily news. The daily news, I would say, is not really education in the deepest sense. It's information. It's hopefully reliable information about what's happening today, what's happening now. But if you want a really good understanding of what's happened, say, over the last few decades with any issue, you have to dig deeper. And the news is not going to necessarily provide you with that. So I think that is part of the distrust in the media. There's an accusation that the media isn't telling us everything. And yes, in many cases, the media is not telling us everything, is not telling you everything. But that's not because they're necessarily trying to keep it from you. They might not know themselves. You might know information that the news doesn't know. That's possible. Not every news outlet knows everything. You might be early on something, or you might have discovered something that the reporter or editor in question was not aware of. So sometimes the public knows more about a specific thing than the news outlet in question. But a lot of it is also to do with the time and the space. There's just not enough time and space to fully explore and explain very deep, say, historical, political issues, just massive, massive topics. There's not enough room. So I think that's part of the distrust. I think there's this belief that the media is not telling us everything. They're keeping things from us. They're holding things back. And in many cases, that's simply because they don't have the information themselves, or there's just too much to say. There's too much to tell. I mean, I've been in that situation myself as a news worker, where I only have a limited amount of space to make the news, to create a news item with. I've been told you can only use this many words, this much space. And I go, well, I've got to leave something out. But I don't like it either, because I know that someone could call me on and say, hey, you missed this, you missed that, you failed to include this crucial detail. I try to include as many pertinent, relevant, crucial details as I can. But again, there's only so much space. I mean, take any serious political or historical topic you want, and there's volumes and volumes of books that have been written about it, never mind news articles. So these are deep, profound, and complicated questions that I would say the daily news is not fully equipped to address. So again, this is a big topic. I'm trying to keep these videos short. If anyone is watching on, might as well always cut these off right when they get going. I could go on for a long time, but I don't know if there's an appetite for that yet. I'm still growing the channel, so I'm trying to keep these to 10, 12 minutes. I don't think I've done 15 yet. I could keep going, and I certainly will on other videos. I will return to this topic, but that's what I believe to be is behind some of the mistrust, is that people think that the media is holding things back, they're not telling the public certain things. And that is true to a certain degree, but it's not necessarily a conspiracy. It might be there's not enough time, enough space, or maybe the news outlet in question doesn't know themselves. They can only pass along what they know. So if they don't know something that you know, they're not going to say it because they don't know yet. And I'm a human being myself. There's things I've learned where I thought, well, I'll definitely mention that. I'll definitely be sure to include that perspective from here on in. I'm always learning myself. Again, I'm awakening from a certain ignorance myself. So that's my early, sort of first draft perspective, if you will, as a news worker. But I'd like to know what you think as a viewer. Do you trust the news? Do you trust the media? Why? Why not? What is your reasoning for that? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Let me know in the comments or send me an email. This is a very important topic, and I'll certainly be returning to it in future videos, but I just wanted to get it started for now. I'll include the link to the Gallup article as well, so you can all read that and digest it and think about it a little more. And keep watching, because we're going to keep talking about this issue right here on Ask a News Worker. Thank you.